All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Talk It Out Tuesday. This webinar is going to be a little bit different because it's going to be more of an open dialogue. So what we're going to do first, though, is we're going to go around and do some introductions so you know who we are. Then we'll go down and we're going to do a little bit of WebEx basics so you know how to navigate this, this platform in case you want to unmute or show us some reactions or rename yourself, any of those things. And then we're going to get right into our conversation. We would really like for you to engage with us, so we'll show you how to unmute, and we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll just be having a conversation, but hopefully going to give you some good information here today, some tools that you can actually use to take with you as well. So my name is Tamra Church. I am one of the Talk It Out ambassadors. I cover all of Eastern North Carolina, so this whole Eastern region. I teach full-time at East Carolina University in the public health degree program, and then I also oversee a 5-county coalition called Coastal Coalition for Substance Awareness and Prevention, which covers Carteret, Craven, Jones, Onslow, and Pamlico counties. We also have a CCSAP Resilience Collaborative. So some of what we're going to talk about initially ties in with some of that work, understanding the root causes of why youth oftentimes initiate substance use, but then also moving quickly over to how we can help to build resilience, not just so our youth can bounce back, but also so they can grow and develop without using substances, to give their brains the best chance at and give them the best chance at being successful in their life and reaching their goals. So thank you again for joining us today. I'm just going to go right across the screen. Jennifer, if you would like to introduce yourself, and then you name the next person.
Yes. Hey, everyone. My name is Jennifer Matthews, and I am also a faculty member at ECU in the exact same department as Tamra. I work well, most of my research is in the area of substance use and trauma, and so I worked very closely with 2 local collaboratives, one for substance use and one for trauma and resilience. So I do a lot of community-based work in both of those areas. So.
Nicole.
Nicole.
That's okay, Nicole.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Augustine. I am also a Talk It Out ambassador with Tamra. Very excited to be here today. I also am the founder and CEO of Rise Consultants, and I focus primarily on the prevention side of the substance use spectrum. Okay, I call it the behavioral health cousins is what I call it. So I'm on the prevention side of our cousin family, and I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about a really important topic, is the intersectionality of trauma with the work that we do. So it's a great topic, and I will pass it on to Tocarra.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tocarra Osborne. I'm the Partnership Engagement Coordinator for our Bladen County Smart Start, and I also work on our Resilient Bladen Coalition project. I'm a certified trainer in protective factors framework through the Children's Trust Fund Alliance. I have many hats in my community. I started my resilience work with innovative approaches, working with children and youth with disabilities, and I've moved over in the world to resilience now and trying to help our communities, but I'm still very active with the Autism Society of Bladen and Columbus County, and I'm also a guardian ad litem for District 13 here, so we see it a lot, and we just want to inform people and help out where we can.
Awesome. Thank you both, all of you. So now just let's go over some brief kind of WebEx basics, because I don't know that everybody's used this platform. So if you look down at the bottom, what you should see on the bottom of your screen is a mute and unmute. We do ask that you all stay unmuted. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that Heather is going to have to unmute you. So if you want to unmute, what we will need you to do is over beside of where you see mute, I think is how you all see it, you will see a little hand that looks like this and then a smiley face. And if you hover over that, you're going to see that it says raise hand. So if I click that, you're going to see my hand raised right there. If you all click that, we're going to see that down in where you are in your participants. So we'll be seeing it. Now, here's the thing though, once you raise your hand, you have to click it again to lower your hand. So if you raise your hand, make sure that you click to unraise your hand. And it's just that same button. And if you look and hover over it, it tells you what to do. Then right beside of that are reactions. And we love whenever, we have people to engage with us. So, if you think something's funny, then you can tell us that you think that that's funny. If you feel like you need us to slow down, just tell us that, right? If you like what we're saying, give us an applause. I personally think we need to have some snaps on here, right? Like, where's my snap function, right? We might be on fire, or we might want to celebrate. Whatever you want to do. It's interesting because on here you can do hand gestures. So if I do this, it starts doing it too. But anyways, I'm getting a little bit too deep and having too much fun with that. So I'll stop there. But once again, if you want to raise your hand, and then you will be unmuted to speak. We would love to have you all have a dialogue with us. We don't just want to talk at you, but we're going to talk amongst ourselves until somebody else kind of chimes in there. Last thing, if you see where you can see participants over to the right-hand side, there is, well, I should go all the way to the right. You'll have on the far right is a little, like a message or the chat. The little bubble. So if you click on that, you're going to be able to see the chat feature. Nicole is going to be overseeing the chat. So anything that you want to put in there, she can be the voice of you, or if you want to unmute, just raise your hand. But then if you see to the left of that, you can click on participants. And if you go in here to participants, oh no, I think it's different though. I was going to say you could rename yourself, but you cannot because you're in attendee listen only mode. But that should give you everything that you need in order to communicate with us. And if you have a question, put it in the chat or raise your hand. All right. Okay, did I cover everything? Oh, and to the bottom left, if you need closed caption, I think it's very important to make sure that people know that this is there. It has the little message with the CC. If you just click it, it's going to pull up that closed caption and show you everything that we're saying here today. All right, ladies, did I miss anything? Okay. All right, so today we are here to talk with you about strengthening families to support youth resilience. And so we're going to start by kind of making the connection between what are called adverse childhood experiences, or you'll hear us refer to this as ACEs, and the connection between ACEs and the initial study and substance use. So that's kind of where we're going to start. Then we're going to transition over pretty quickly to talking about, how we can help our youth to build resilience, to be able to bounce back from day-to-day stressors that they're going to experience, and develop some coping skills that are going to keep them from wanting to initiate substance use to begin with. So our first question is really kind of talking about the Kaiser Permanente study, the CDC study. Would any one of you like to take the lead on explaining that Kaiser Permanente study and then the 3 realms of ACEs? Go ahead, Nicole. Or were you shaking your head yes or just agreeing with me? You're on mute.
You saw me shaking my head. I was already putting the 3 realms of ACEs link in the chat. So I'd be happy to kind of talk about this. I mean, the ACEs original study, really came out in the 90s, and it was honestly just looking at, is there a connection between health and wellness and trauma that people experience? And as a result of this large study, they found 10 indicators that someone could self-screen or someone else could screen for, and depending on the more of these ACEs you have, the greater the link was to a myriad of health outcomes, including like heart disease, obesity, suicide, substance use disorder, all sorts of things. And I think what was most interesting about the ACEs study is that it was originally done in predominantly white, educated folks. And there still was a strong connection between the number of ACEs someone has experienced and their health outcomes. And so since the 90s, when that first came out, the concept of ACEs really has broadened because the first version was so focused on the individual. And so now there's this concept of the 3 realms of ACEs, where we're looking at, sure, what happens to the individual and, those 10 items, but also what's occurring in the community, what's occurring in the environment. How do these other spaces create trauma in someone's life? And what are those long-term effects that happen? So I'm a huge fan of ACEs. My background is sociology, so I'm always kind of thinking about the social context of health and wellness. But that's like the 40,000 foot view. There's a whole lot more, but that's like the quick, simple 40,000 foot view of what the ACEs is all about. And the newest version, or evolution, I would say, of it, which is focused on the 3 realms of ACEs.
Absolutely. And thank you for putting that link into the chat. All y'all have to do is click on that and then it'll tell you to continue, click that and it'll pop you over. So now you mentioned there was this original study and then there was, these community factors. We now know on those 3 realms, we also have these climate factors. Cara or Jen, would you be willing to kind of talk briefly about like specifically those ACEs? Like what does that look like in the home environment or community environment, and give our attendees kind of some ideas around what those are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we can look at that. Especially when you look at where we are, we're in southeastern North Carolina here, and quite a few of us are that I've seen attendees here that I know. One of them can be hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, stuff like that. And I know I've talked to people in the community, children who are teenagers or even younger children, and you say the word hurricane, you can immediately see their body tense up. That's an ACE. And it's affected them so much that it went, every time it's hurricane season now, every time you hear that, you can see this automatic reaction. I mean, I felt it myself, my heart kind of sped up a little bit, my body tensed up a little bit because we've been through 2 in the last 6 years that were really bad on our community. And that's the environmental ACEs that a lot of us go through here in North Carolina. And you start looking at community ACEs, you have poverty, low income areas, you have racism as part of that now too. I know the original 10 on the ACEs score now they're saying they're looking at switching it up to about 14 or 15 because it's just adversity over and over again, especially when you look at racism in a community. It's something that person deals with every time they walk out the door or every time they think about walking out the door. So it's a big thing.
Mm-hmm. Jen, did you want to add on anything?
Yeah, all I'll say is, or add to all of that is that when you look at even in the original 10 ACEs, it's you can see it in the tree, right, of the image that that's in the link. So it's what they consider to be household dysfunction. So if your parents are divorced, if you have substance use, family members who have substance use, a mental health issue. You have neglect, and then different types of abuse all built into that. And Cara's right, like they are extending it. You've seen some with bullying and other extensions of ACEs, like of those traumas. But I think that when you look at the community trauma, so like the ground and the roots, in public health, we call those the upstream issues, right? So it's those things that are upstream that sort of lend to, thank you, Nicole, that lend to perhaps that lead to some of those traumas that they might experience, as well as not even just leading to it, but also making those worse, right? So when they are experienced. So, and then you look at the community, again, it's it's that upstream, those upstream things that are leading to that.
Yeah. And just to add to that, thinking about those household, what is happening within the house. And so if all of you on here today are parents, things that you might be interested in too, specific to what you can do there. Neglect and abuse are part of these, but also having a parent who uses substances or has a substance use disorder, a parent's divorce in a family, domestic violence. All of these things are going to impact that child. And what we've seen is those original 10, they've actually made a connection between those and having 4 or more and having the increased risk of initiation of substance use. So people that have 4 or more of those first 10 adversities are more likely to end up using substances. And now, Nicole, I see some things in the chat. Is there anything you want to share before we move on?
No, the only thing that came up, or maybe I should say yes, the only thing that did come up in the chat is Berna asked about peer pressure. Darion did respond to not thinking that peer pressure specifically was an ACE. However, depending on what happened as a result of the peer pressure, that could be an ACE experience for a young person, especially if we think about bullying as one of the ones. So hopefully that provided a little bit of clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if the peer pressure led to an event that could be considered trauma as well.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, that bullying behavior though, and that constant, having to deal with those things day in and day out with having someone bully you would definitely be considered an ACE. With abuse, it's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. And that can come from a parent, but it could also come from a cousin, a colleague, a neighbor, a babysitter. It's not who does it, it's that piece is there. So we also know that having ACEs, and I like to point out that it's not just like as soon as you get 18 that this stuff doesn't affect you, right? So I really talk about it more as adverse life experiences. So while the brain is developing, of course, it can be wired a certain way depending on the experiences that we've had going through life. But even on into adulthood, what we know about the emerging brain science is that our brains can be rewired through both negative but also through positive experiences. And what we also know is that, just having these adversities in our life is not necessarily, laying out the destiny for us, that we have the potential to overcome some of these, what I will call barriers in life. Because there's going to be a lot of things such as these climate events and things like that we can't control. We're not going to stop those hurricanes from coming. Here in Pollocksville, we had our whole entire town flood during Hurricane Matthew. So we have experienced that same thing. As soon as hurricane season starts, everybody's a little bit more on edge. But what we can do is to think about ways that we can create positive childhood experiences for our youth, so they are less likely to go out and use, but also less likely to just have, issues building and developing relationships throughout their life, being successful and productive and being able to reach their dreams, having the self-confidence to do all of that. So, really thinking about this from this whole person perspective. But there's an impact on the brain development whenever kids have adverse childhood experiences. Because I feel like I'm talking a lot, would one of y'all like to touch on that?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say one thing, but in addition to that, I think that a lot of times, so the impact on the brain, it actually, you have rapid brain development at an early age, from birth till about 3 years old. And in this rapid brain development, if you are experiencing as a 0 to 3-year-old child, right, any of these ACEs, the impact it causes, it will make your brain, only operate in certain areas of your brain. And so it prevents that rapid development in some of the other areas. So what I often hear people say is like, oh, they're only 6 months old. What do they know? Well, a lot actually of things that occur in that time. So it's important to remember that these impacts aren't, it's not just when a child can be aware that these things are occurring. It actually starts at, honestly, pre-birth, but during pregnancy. So to keep that in mind. But the impacts on the actual brain itself, your brain develops until the age of 25. And so any of these impacts can affect that wiring that we were. So it's very important. What they talk about pruning, right? So you have all of these fires that are going on in your brain, and your brain actually starts pruning the ones that you aren't using, and that's just a way. If you're not using it, then your brain decides you don't need it anymore. So if you aren't using parts of your brain, like some of the higher parts of your brain, the cortex, so to speak, then that development doesn't happen. That's when it becomes important, as Tamra was talking about, to actually focus and try to figure out how you can develop new pathways to allow some of that growth to occur, regrowth to occur. Yes, but I just wanted to make sure that was pointed out, because I hear so often that kid's too young to remember. Well, it still impacts their brain a lot.
Nicole or Cara, did you have something to add?
I just like the statement that it still affects your brain. I think sometimes we forget that the brain is a growing organ in the body. You know what I mean? It's like we forget that. And so I think of traumas and ACEs as assaults on that organ. Just like if I was diabetic and a sugar is an assault on my pancreas, right? It's no different to me. ACEs are traumatic experiences for the brain, and the brain is growing at least to about 25, and those are things that really do forever mold a person. So, and continue past that stage, right? So I like the way you were saying that, Jennifer.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Jennifer, but isn't there another big chunk of brain development when children are turn teenagers? So when we're talking about teenagers and alcohol, alcohol already affects an adult brain that's already fully formed. But you talk about a teenager who's going through another big brain growth and they're drinking on top of it, it affects them as well at that point too. And if they have ACEs from early childhood, their brain's not going to be where it's supposed to be by the time they're 25, 30, 40 years old, which is where you start seeing a lot of the stuff. And then they have children of their own. So we go into this whole cycle of, just repeating the cycles of abuse and alcoholism and everything else that we do.
Yeah, and that brain development occurs from lower brain to upper, like to the top part of your brain. Like as you get older, like that's how the brain development works. So even in, as a teenager, when you see that rapid growth again, I mean, that's your higher level, like rational thought. That's the last part of your brain to be developed. So if that's the part that's growing and you're not, that's what the alcohol or, and substances really is affecting, then that's the area that's going to be affected during that brain growth. So something to think about as well.
Yeah, and Nicole put in the chat, so there is a direct link to the Talk It Out page because not only do adverse childhood experiences affect how the brain is developed, but also alcohol affects the developing brain. I mean, it affects all of our brains, but specific to youth, it's a great graphic. And Nicole, I don't know if you had wanted to pull that up. I started to share, and then you did before me, so or I can. It's up to you. You multitask so much better than I do. But it's a great graphic. Talk It Out has some great information for parents and to help us to understand how alcohol affects that developing brain. I was actually out at a high school this morning and shared some of the information with them, and they were really excited to see some of that. We also have some how alcohol affects athletic performance too. For some of you parents, wanting to talk to your youth about the developing brain, about athletic performance, we have everything that you would need on our website in order to be able to have those conversations with your kids, and even how those conversations are going to change, from the time that they're 10 until the time that they're 18 and going off to college. So a lot of the information that you need to be successful in that, we provide it for you there at talkitoutnc.org. I always want to say gov. talkitoutnc.org. And so, just briefly, because I want to get on to thinking more about what parents can do, but also just kind of understanding, because what we found is that a lot of times parents believe, especially in the older kids, that, well, we provide them the alcohol because they're going to drink anyway, right? And this is some of the things that we hear quite often. And kind of understanding accessibility to alcohol, kind of how young people are even introduced to it and how that makes a difference in youth initiation of alcohol and other substances. So, specific to parents, really just understanding the laws, the legal consequences, but I would even say almost more. And I'll share, I have a 17-year-old son, and so we're right there on the cusp of this really wanting to be a young adult and be on his own and do what adults do kind of thing. And so our conversation has shifted as he's gotten older, and I really helped him to just understand how it affects the developing brain, and because even little amounts of alcohol affect that teenage brain. And the problem with that for me is that if my son starts using at an early age, he is more likely to become addicted because of how the brain is actually developing, and adolescents and teens are going to be more at risk of developing addiction because that pleasure reward center of their brain, as soon as it starts getting some of that dopamine from any of those drugs, it becomes addicted very quickly. And so helping him to understand that his best path forward, to be successful, to reach all of his goals and his dreams and to do the things that he wants to do, he's better off to wait until he's at least 21 to have his first drink. So he gives his brain the best chance of developing, right? And so I'll stop there. And
yeah, I'll add that one quick thing, in that you have to also remember, right? Like you don't have that rational thought, decision making, like that hasn't developed yet in a teenage brain very well. So on top of the alcohol affecting it, they don't have it to begin with. So it's almost like expecting them. It's difficult to expect a 13, 14-year-old person to have the same rational thought that I have at 40 years old. So so just, you know, keep that in mind as well, because we can't expect them to understand, you know, why you're saying no to, you know, all your friends are drinking and no, you can't. But yeah, we can't expect them to always make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, it's like we have to be their cortex for them, right? Nicole, were you going to share something, or Cara?
I was just going to say, you know, and it's great that your son has you as that protective factor, because you have a knowledge of parenting skills and and child development. So you know that he's better off taking that drink at 21 than he is at 14. But we have to look at the whole thing too, that a lot of people don't have these skills or this knowledge, and it can start off as innocently as when a baby's teething and rubbing rum on their gums to help, help them with the teething process. It can also be as innocent as just a 3-year-old, and mom and dad drink. They may not be alcoholics, but they have a drink. And some people think it's funny to give a baby a drink to see the look on their face. It's kind of like giving a baby a lemon, because beer's bitter, and just to see what their reaction is. But at the same time, we look at the developing brain and even genetics down to a point that there's a gene for alcoholism. So, like you said, you're setting them up for failure, but we don't know that, a lot of parents don't get these skills right out the gate. And that's one thing we're so trying to do is introduce the protective factors, introduce this whole brain science and development to new parents, because sometimes you just don't know. And we have the whole thing of monkey see, monkey do. Well, mom and dad drink, so it's okay for me to drink. And when you get a teenage brain that you said it's irrational and we're invincible and we can do whatever we want to, they're going to do it. And it leads to a lifelong struggle with alcohol and other substances as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The only thing I'll say here is I've most recently got very interested in studying history and how we got to where we got to in terms of our consciousness. And the thing I've been learning is that we have not always understood alcohol. I mean, we just haven't, you all. There literally was a doctor who it was Dr. Rush, I believe was his name, who had to say that alcohol actually created the disease of addiction. For centuries, we didn't think it had anything to do with the alcohol. We thought it was because someone was immoral or a lack of willpower, or they weren't spiritual enough, they weren't godly enough. And that's why they were suffering. And we truly did believe this. So we have a long history of operating with the substance as if it's not an actual poison or not an actual negative thing for the body, which is why we would, give it to our babies and all this other kind of stuff. Because I heard you talk about the lemon, and a lemon is benign, right? But we live in a society where a lemon and alcohol are just as benign for some people. And that still lives in our consciousness. So I think there's some of what I'm learning is we're also having to unlearn long time history of not having the right information, not quite understanding the brain and substances and how they interact and how addiction is created. So it's interesting stuff when you start to kind of look from that perspective. It's like, oh, okay, we got to catch up with our knowledge of what we know to be true now. And the truth, what I think is if you haven't, I don't see any spaces in our society that teach people this. Kids don't get taught it. You learn to drink from who you saw using, and that's it. And everybody's doing it, so it looks like it's okay, and sometimes people have a little too much, but for the most part, it looks okay. That's the mentality, right? And so I think this work and our work is so important for creating a future where less folks are experiencing the issue of addiction. Some of the conversations I tell young people, I'm like, look, you can almost go to almost every family has an older person who's been drinking forever. Everybody got an uncle, a cousin, something. And I tell people, just interview them, ask them, how old were you when you first started drinking? Just ask them. And almost every single person who is older in life dealing with addiction, they started using when they were kids. I mean, it is like across the board. It's a rare instance where that doesn't happen. And so I say, look at what our evidence tells us. The younger you start, the more likely you are to deal with addiction. That, to me, that's the simple conversation. We got to recognize that piece. And that's why I love what Tamra says, which is she talks to her son about, hey, wait as long as possible. You want to give your brain as much time to grow and develop before you start adding some stuff to it that, will put it off kilter, you know? So,
I like that. Off
Yeah.
kilter.
I will add that if you started to talk to some of the older people in your family and how long do they drink, I would also probably bet that they've experienced some type of trauma in their life, which is also tied directly into that. And the one other thing that I'll mention is that we listen. I'm a mom of 3 small children. I have 2 6-year-olds and a 3-year-old. I understand what it feels like to come home after working all day to a crazy house and you put your kids to sleep and you're like, I'm so stressed out, I just need to unwind. Well, we've taken to this idea that like a glass of wine or sometimes a bottle, if that's our unwinding, we need that to go to sleep. And what we can't, I am very diligent in my house that if my kids ask me if I'm drinking a glass of wine, like I just say that I like it. Like it's just an adult drink that I like. I don't want, even if it is my coping mechanism sometimes, I don't want them to know that, right? Because that communicates to them that this is a healthy way to cope with something that I might be feeling. And if they're feeling a certain way at school when they get into high school and I have a wine cabinet that doesn't have an alcohol lock or something like that, then well, I'll just do this because that's what mommy said she does. And we even glorified it on Facebook. Like, I don't know how many Mother's Day things I saw that was like, mommy's favorite drink, wine. Ha ha ha, isn't this funny? Well, I mean, is that funny? And so like that should be something that we need to think about in modeling to our children. Because if we're doing that and that's what they're seeing and they think your favorite drink is wine, then I mean that's a larger something as a society that we probably should think about.
Absolutely. Great point, Jen. And part of like through Talk It Out too, we also have the Talk It Out pledge where whenever you take the pledge as a parent, you are actually saying that you're going to, and I forget the exact wording. I think Nicole's going to pull it up for us and put it in the chat, but it's around responsible alcohol consumption. So, being mindful of your own consumption, maybe even as Jen said, the reasons why you drink and being able to communicate that in a way in which you're not saying, I'm doing this to cope with today, but I'm doing this just because it tastes good. So you're not making those connections for those kids. And I think it's important too, because nowadays, there's so much conversation around the opioid epidemic, but I think it's important to also recognize that a lot of overdoses happen not just because of opioids alone. I mean, if fentanyl's involved, that's a whole different ball game. However, what we see a lot of times is also these co-occurring. So it's poly drug use. So, well, really even just the two, but alcohol is combined with opioids because alcohol is a depressant, so it depresses your system, and that coupled with an opioid is what we see a lot of times in our overdose. Would any of you all like to add or contribute to that?
I didn't know if Nicole was going or not. I saw her thinking, and I was like, "Is she going to?"
Go ahead. Listen, I am so vocal. I mute myself because I'm over here. That's right. Oh my God, yes. That's exactly right.
I just wanted to say that a lot. We talk about opioids, and this is like my own personal soapbox in the community. Like, yes, opioids are a problem right now, but the vast majority of people who are addicted to opioids didn't start on opioids. They probably started on alcohol, and heck, there was probably something before that. And so, like, that's something to consider as well. And I mean, so many, and I've said this, and people just roll their eyes at me. Like, I am not a prohibitionist. Like, buy alcohol if you want to, drink it responsibly, do not drive. Like, if that's what you want to do. But like, think about what you're doing and the message you're sending to your children, and allow them the opportunity to make those decisions for themselves when they are old enough and capable to do so. But it's almost like we set them up because we relax in our in-home, which it is illegal in the state of North Carolina to provide your child alcohol in your home, by the way. So if you, except for there's like a small exceptions. But if you do, like that relaxed behavior allows them to think that it's relaxed for other drugs as well. And it sort of, I hate using gateway, but it does open up sort of this thought that well, if I do this, I can just do this too. Like, this is prescribed. My parents have this in their, in their medicine cabinets. And again, they don't have their cortex yet either. So these are really big decisions to be making at that age. And, as a parent thinking about that.
Yeah, and you touched down on that about access, right? So we know alcohol, we've got these great little magnets that say where, your kids first get their first beer from is, and it shows a picture of a refrigerator and it says right beside the milk. So even being mindful of where you're keeping your alcohol, but also thinking about opioids, making sure that if you have any medications in your home, to prevent accidental overdose or even intentional, for people and animals, think about your dogs too that might get a hold of some of those things, or cats. But there is the Lock Your Med campaign, which we promote across this state, and Nicole's going to put it in the chat there. If you are looking for, you can get free prescription medication lock boxes, and Community Impact NC has a list of all of the coalitions, and once Nicole puts that in the chat, you'll be able to click on that. It'll take you over to a map which shows you all of those coalitions. Connect with your local substance use prevention coalition to see about getting a lockbox distributed to you. Would y'all like to say anything else about that, or?
I also believe now too with if you have opiates that you get prescribed to, I think you also have to have Narcan in your house too. So that would be something to look into as well, in case you or even your child accidentally overdose. And with alcohol, that's going to increase that risk because you're not thinking about when's the last time you took it, and you might double dose, or if a child gets a hold or your teenager gets a hold to it, they don't know the dosage either. And so yeah, I think you're supposed to have Narcan in your house now if you're prescribed an opiate.
That is true. I will confirm that.
Yeah, great point. So I didn't have it in our notes, but Nicole, if you wanted to look up the North Carolina Harm Reduction website, and so they can get you in touch with people within your community that can get you Narcan. Now, understand that there are pharmacies, and they have this on that website as well. There are pharmacies where you can go. You do not need a prescription. However, in my understanding, it's not free at every pharmacy. However, there are coalitions like the one that I'm affiliated with, Coastal Coalition for Substance Awareness and Prevention, and in our 5 counties, we do have a standing order, but a lot of so we can distribute it to community members. A lot of your health departments are going to have that as well, but you can find that information through that harm reduction website.
In Pitt County, the Pitt County Coalition on Substance Use, we have access to Narcan that we can distribute in the community as well.
Yeah, so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll do like a brief training just showing you how to administer it, but more importantly, how to look for the signs of overdose, because you do not want to give someone Narcan if they have not overdosed. And Narcan is a naloxone. So what it does is it's a, how do we word this? They say it's overdose prevention, but if somebody's already overdosed, it's a life-saving medication. It's when someone has overdosed, you can administer this naloxone, this medication, and it can revive them. It can, or not revive, I'm using the wrong word, but it can pull them out of the overdose. What's the right word? Retrieve, revive, help me out. Reverse. It's overdose reversal. That's right. So thank you for that.
Immediate detox.
Yes, you still would call 911, and that's why there's the educational materials that go along and a training around that. So absolutely. And but I would really love to kind of do some myth busting here, because what we've talked about so far is, like all the kids that are doing it, but I mean, how many kids are not drinking alcohol? Do we know statistics on that?
Oops. I was like, is that rhetorical?
No.
Are you going to share the statistics with us?
No, see, Nicole, in our conversations, I thought you were bringing that information.
Yes.
You did plan for this today.
I can find the number real quick, but it's the majority of our youth actually don't consume alcohol. Good. There we go, yeah. 75%.
Thank you. And it's different everywhere, right? But across the board for the most part, right? The majority are not doing these things. But think about it. Whenever you ask kids who's drinking, they're going to say everybody's doing it, right? Everybody's vaping, everybody's drinking, everybody's doing these things. And Nicole said, yeah, it fluctuates. So it's really important to just start talking with your kids, not just about this, but about everything, right? You know, sit down and talk with your kids during your morning breakfast or dinner meal. Sit and have conversations with them, because it's not about having one large conversation. It's not like, well, we had the big talk. It's really these continued conversations and how those conversations change as the children get older, right? And that's another thing. We have some parent conversations, some conversation starters, and Nicole will put that in the chat as well to help us to think about ways that we can even have these conversations with our youth, and how those conversations change. But we also want to make sure that y'all realize that, a lot of these protective factors or positive childhood experiences, kind of shifting over to thinking about how can we help to build resilience in our youth. So these positive childhood experiences are, really things like connection, having at least one, but they really say now two, adults that care about that child, that check in with them, respect them, value their voice, really listen to them, is helpful in their growth and development. And so if you think about like a seesaw, right, where you have that fulcrum in the middle and you have the seesaw, what we know is that all these adversities can happen, and some of those we may be able to kind of buffer, but maybe some of them we can't, but to shift our focus to think about what we can do. And the more of these like positive experiences, and here's my fulcrum, so it might be looking like this with adverse, but as soon as we start adding those positive childhood experiences, it teeters over to the other side. So if we can really, I'll say, jam pack the positive childhood experiences in there with our youth, even they can then build these coping skills and overcome these different obstacles and have the best chance in being successful in life and remaining, going through life without an alcohol or substance use disorder. And so we're also going to share with you, so, thinking about positive childhood experiences, but also thinking about just how resilience is built. And Jennifer put something in the chat for you all. Jen, would you like to share what that is? And then Nicole's going to put something in from the Harvard Center on the Developing Child to help you understand and do more deeper dive into resilience. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, it's okay. We were just talking about youth substance use, and somebody mentioned the Good Samaritan law and how important that is for youth to understand. And Pix's youth team a few years ago wrote their own PSA, acted in it, worked with the county on getting it together, and I put the link in the chat so that you could see what the youth team did. It's really good. Like, I was very impressed with their writing. So that's what I shared.
Awesome. And so for those of you that do not know, so the Good Samaritan law, it protects people. So whether it's alcohol poisoning or overdose, if somebody's underage, but yet they've still consumed and now they have alcohol poisoning, or taken prescription meds that aren't theirs and they've overdosed. And even if the person who finds them is underage, or they may be, doing something they're not supposed to be as well, that Good Samaritan law actually protects them from legal consequences. So the whole idea and the reason why it was put in place is to keep people alive. Make sure that you assess them, call 911, turn them on their side, stay with them until 911 gets there, but know that you're protected under that Good Samaritan law. So I'm excited to look at that one. I'll have to look there. So then, because I'm looking, we have 15 minutes left, and Cara, I really want to give you space to share too about, so there's the Strengthening Families Protective Factors Framework, and this covers 5 protective factors in which a lot of us that do substance use prevention work, we've started tying in these 5 protective factors into what we do. So I'm going to take a step back and open the floor to Cara, if you would like to kind of share what those are, and we're going to give you some resources there that you can actually use, you can print. They say just to print them as is. So I'll mute now.
Okay, so, and I probably actually knock out our last few bullet points with the protective factors. So just looking at the protective factors, there's 5. So we have parent resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, concrete support in times of need, and social emotional competence of children. So when we look at those, we look at parent resilience, and we know resilience is the ability to recover from difficult life experiences, and often by strengthening us and transforming us by those experiences. And to go back to something Tamra said about having a positive adult in your life, that's very true in every child's life. If you have 1 or 2 in your life, and I think we all, if you sit here and think about it, from when you were a kid, you had a favorite teacher, a favorite coach, a favorite youth leader, or someone at your Sunday school, or someone somewhere that you looked up to and that you still remember to this day. And they were a protective factor. We have them now, and people just don't know what they are. There's a label, and I know we don't like labels and titles, but it's definitely a good label. It's a positive one. So we can all be protective factors to children around us, or even to adults around us. And I always say, be kind to no matter who you meet, because you don't know where they are today. You don't know where they are in their life. And sometimes that one kindness, they may never know your name, they may never see you again, but they'll remember you for the rest of their life. I have a few that I've seen in passing of people who were kind that day to me. And so just always be kind and come from a place of love and grace. So social connections are huge for families, especially in our rural areas where a lot of our families are isolated by geographical location. When we look that sometimes if we live on the outlines of a county, we're 30 miles from town, and it's hard. So we look at ways to build up social connections in families, and that can be a Facebook group. It can be a group that meets. If you have to go get a van and pick people up to come into town, families appreciate that. And then also having families at the table, try to find a way to reimburse them for the time, whether it's a $20 gift card or, providing dinner or childcare if you want them to come to a meeting or, anything like that. Try to reimburse parents for their time. It's so important for those social connections and parental resilience. And we talked about knowledge and parenting and child development. That's huge. And we really, really have to start this with as soon as you have a baby, if not before. We're trying our best to get in with, the OBs and our early childhood development places like our Smart Starts, even our doctor's offices, just to help build that knowledge of you as a parent and also how your child is developing. And learn the signs, act early. If anybody can pull that up and share it, we know that that's huge for parents to see those milestones. And going back to my children with disabilities days, children with disabilities are, I don't know the statistic, but they are more likely to be abused because they are a child with a disability, and the parents do not have the skills to know how to deal with that child. You don't know the resources in your county to help you with that child. And then any child really, communication is huge. So all of us sitting here today are probably professionals. I hope there's parents here that have never heard this stuff before, and I'm glad you're here. But we really need to, as agencies and professionals, communicate better in our counties, because we expect people to know how to be a good parent. We expect children to know how to act, but they don't. They don't have the skills. We can't expect children to be little adults, and because they're not. They don't have the skills, they don't have the brain for it yet. So that comes into that knowledging of parenting and child development, and also our other protective factor, the social emotional health of children. And that's interactions that help children develop the ability to communicate clearly, to recognize and regulate their emotions. We just did one with PBS here in Bladen County, regulating big emotions. And because kids don't know how to handle those. When they get mad, they get fiery. We've seen that. And so we've got to learn how to help them regulate those big emotions and establish and maintain relationships with each other. I know 40-year-old adults who are horrible at relationships, and and some of them are because they have ACEs and they have abuse, alcohol and abusive and addiction problems. So their brain never developed to the point to be able to do these things that we ask so many people to do. So we really have to, and I think we all know that 140-year-old who still acts like they're 15, but look at what they do. They were abused, they drink, they might have a substance abuse issue. So we have to look from a lens of trauma that they didn't develop past the age of 15 because of what they did back then. So, like I said, coming from a place of love and grace, I know in the last few years, I've really had to change my lens on a lot of things. And that's hard to do sometimes, but with practice, we can do it. And then the last one, protective factor, is concrete supports in times of need. So knowing that there's supports and services to reduce stress and help families be stronger. And in communities, we think of DSS, the health department, our local Smart Starts, maybe even PTA program at school. But having those things that we know are always going to be there no matter what bumps we hit, are awesome to know. And like I said, communication is so big in some of our rural counties, but even our bigger cities. Some people just don't know what's out there. And so the 5 protective factors framework is actually geared toward the workplace, and it doesn't change how you work. It changes how you deal with the people on the other side of the table, the families that come to you for help. And so, because I think we've probably all been there, regardless of where we're at the grocery store, or if we've ever had to walk into social services or the health department, we meet that one person who has a little bit of an attitude. And the protective factors framework is to help that person learn to deal with you walking in the door. Because sometimes you got to look at families. Sometimes we don't want to walk, we don't want to be on the other side of this desk asking for help, or as some people have said it, begging for help. You know, we don't want to be there. We don't, they don't want to have to go and ask for help, but they have no other choice at that point. So you on the other side of that desk through the protective factors training can learn better ways and see it from a different lens and a different perspective of what it's like to be in their shoes. So if you have a protective factors training in your area, I would highly recommend going to it. If you have the means to be a trainer, I would definitely recommend that too. But yes, most definitely get to know it, love it, live it. There you go, Tamra.
Well, and I will share that for those of you that are over here in Eastern North Carolina, we will be bringing in some trainings on strengthening families' protective factors framework. And Cara, that might be a side conversation that I was going to have with you, but we're hoping to bring it in for the 2022 Resilience Symposium, which is looking like it's going to be on September the 30th, which is a Friday. So we would love to see you come here to Eastern North Carolina, beautiful town of New Bern. It's in the Riverfront Convention Center. So, Nicole, did you want to share? I saw you put something in the chat, but
Oh, I was just thinking about, what Takar was saying and the other side of that, right? Which is, unfortunately, our system does not do a great job of treating folks who do need help very well. So, we notice that the person may have an attitude, sometimes rightfully so. If you've ever had to actually be on the side of needing social services or seeing a doctor who's a part of a public health department, and you get there for 8 o'clock and you stay the whole day to see a doctor, you know what I mean? There's just so many challenges with the system too. That just reminded me as you were talking to Cara of the whole picture too, unfortunately. That adds its own level of issue.
Mm-hmm. And with the protective factors too, we're trying to tell agencies not to re-traumatize the person. So anybody
Yes.
that's ever been there on the other side of the table, and this is one thing I will tell everybody, you were probably 1 or 2 paychecks away from being on the other side of that table. You were one bad drink or one stupid peer pressure moment from being on the other side of that table needing help. So that's my biggest thing. Remember that. But we re-traumatize them, because when you walk in the door, you got to say why you're there. Then when you go meet the other person, and then social services is not streamlined. So you've got a worker for everything you're applying for. Sometimes that can be up to 4 or 5 workers. And every time you go to them, you have to retell your story. And whatever happened, if you were in a domestic violence situation and now your income has drastically changed because you have 2 children and your husband or your boyfriend was abusive and he had all the money, you have to go in and re-traumatize yourself by telling that story 4 times. And like you said, at 8 o'clock in the morning, you might not get out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It is a day full of trauma, and it's hard. It really is. And I'm not too proud to say I've been on the other side of that table, and it's hard. And now, where I'm on the other side of the table, I try to treat everybody with kindness. So like I said, kindness and grace all day.
yeah, thank you so much for that. So we do only have 5 minutes, and I would love to make sure that people leave here with some actual tangible skills and tools. So I'm going to start by sharing just some of the things that I do in order to build resilience in my family and with my son. We started really young, but people are still impressed that, like, my son and I play chess almost every day. That's really all that he'll play with me anymore because he beats me at everything. And so he says it's no fun. But trust me, it was not like that always. For many years, I beat him at everything, but it got him to be good. He would get so frustrated. Well, I don't like to play with you because you always win. That's just one way to do it, though, right? But I mean, I'm talking board games where we sit down and we're interacting as a family. Whenever we have breakfast and dinner, like, I know the pandemic was really hard for a lot of people. I'll be honest, I was so appreciative. I could have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my son every day. I wasn't able to do that before. Well, we had breakfast kind of walking out the door, and we would have dinner, but it wasn't the same. We were able to really sit down and just have conversations. Take those times whenever you're driving to and from school or wherever. And instead of being plugged in, have conversations. And I know Jen said this before. She's like, how do you get your son to talk? I think was one of the things, because we have a really good relationship. And what it is it's about asking the right questions. Never, ever ask an adolescent or a teenager or even a young person, like, a yes or no question, because that's all you're going to get. So you ask probing questions. What was the best thing that happened to you at school today? And it makes space for them to tell you those things. Have certain things in terms of, like, cell phone usage. we could have a whole nother conversation about that, the addictiveness of social media and internet use. Like in our treatment facilities, they are treating people for this now, just so y'all know. It is a process addiction, but detaching. So that looks like me as an adult having to detach to model that for my son. But then enforcing that with my son, there are certain times where it's on the docking station and we're talking. We're not looking at the top of each other's heads. I'll stop there so I don't take up all the space. What do y'all do to engage with your kids?
I still talk to my kids. So I have one of my sons is I don't know, he's very attached to me. And so I used to rock him every night. Like he's always my terrible sleeper. So at night he still climbs up on my lap, almost, 4.5 feet of him climbs up on me, and like we just talk every night, and he calls it rocking. I mean, we're not rocking like in the traditional sense, right? Like we're just sitting there having a conversation. But I will tell you, so one of the I don't have teenagers yet, quite frankly. I'm not ready for that. But one of the things that always stuck with me is I had a parent one time that said, I don't really care if my kid doesn't like that I'm asking questions about their life, right? Like I'm still going to ask questions about their life because I want them to know that I want to know about their life. And they said sometimes they'll open up and have all kinds of things to say, and other times you can just tell they don't want to respond. But at least they know that I care enough to ask. And so they may, I guess you just have to be prepared for both responses. I don't know, but that was always something that has stuck with me from. I think it was an unsolicited. I don't even know why it came up, but just somebody said, "Hey, just remember this," and I was like, "Okay," and it just really has stuck. So even if you don't think that oh, Mom, why are you asking me that? Like, I mean, heck, I already get that from my 6-year-old. I don't. I mean, I'm still gonna ask. So that's just something to, maybe a piece of advice that might hit home with some people as well.
Awesome. Thank
I
you.
think with me, I've always been very open and honest with my children. About sex, drugs, life in general. And sometimes, they say we have to have a filter. I really don't, because I know how harsh life can be. Because a lot of the stuff we've talked about here today happened to me as a child. So I'm very open with my children. I let them know that yes, the world is a beautiful place, but there are some very dark people and things in it. And I've got teenagers now. I've got a 13-year-old, 15, 17, and 21. And so it's interesting to get the conversations we have, but as a parent, just letting that child know that you're their biggest fan and that you love them every day is huge to children.
So I don't have any biological children. However, I've done, quite a bit of raising of other people's kids, if you will. And some is just because I've always had an interest and fascination with children and the development of a human being. It's a remarkable thing to witness from infancy up until even now as an adult. So for me, some of the things I focus on a lot have already been mentioned, but I like to approach it from a place of curiosity, of just awe of you're another human being. What are you doing in life? What's happening? Help me understand your world, and you'll be surprised. And then I guess the biggest tip I've learned with boys specifically, and this may be helping for Tamra and her games, is that you get a lot from boys if you include activity with it. Instead of like, oh, let's sit and talk, let's play a game, and while we're playing a game we talk, whether that's basketball or throwing a football. You'll be surprised the level of conversation you get from boys specifically by putting it inside of an activity, a physical activity. So that's all.
Do something they want to do, right?
Yeah.
Invest in them and be interested in them as young people. Well, so it is 1:31. I mean, I think we could continue this conversation because honestly, we didn't even dive as deep as we had planned and wanted to in terms of some of those resilient skills. I did add the iChill app in the chat there, so that is free, available to anyone and everyone. Because whenever we think too about being able to, calm our kids down and communicate with our kids. When we talk about the stress, if we are stressed and we're operating out of a stress response, I don't know about y'all, but I'm way more reactive. I'm way more irritable. All of my good parenting knowledge goes out the door and I just yell, right? Like I don't do that often, just so y'all know, but I do get pushed to my limits, and I'm honest, and I will share that it has happened. And so, just being able to be our best selves, we really can only be our best selves if we're operating out of this prefrontal cortex, right? That we're not reacting. And so it goes over a whole set of skills. Jennifer and I are both certified community resiliency model teachers. And so we hold trainings quite often. If you were interested in that, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. I believe that, Nicole, are you going to get trained in that?
I think so.
Yay. And I think Cara too, right? Yep, she's doing it next week. So lots of CRIM trainers across the state this week. Oh, yay. But yeah, so we would love to have you in any of those trainings and to teach some of that. So hopefully you all, took at least some things away today of what you can do to help your kids just to bounce back from some of this stuff, to deal with some of this stuff. But I forgot to say the self-regulation piece though. We can't really, kids can't really self-regulate on their own. They need us to learn to co-regulate first, but we have to be regulated to be able to co-regulate with them. So using these skills, the youngest person for those to learn was 2 years old. The oldest person has been 104. So you can teach them to your kids. That can be a whole nother conversation, and Jen will shake her head and agree it works. But we would love to talk with y'all too. Jennifer says September 30th. Is that our next one? Or something else?
That's the date of your conference.
Oh, yeah. So, but yeah, unless there's any last questions, I didn't see any in the chat. We just thank you all so much for joining us today. We truly appreciate you all, and hope that the next one that we have that you all join again. So any last closing words from any of you?
Sorry, Tracy's asking real quick to repeat the name again. I guess it's
of the community resiliency model.
Yeah.
Yes, community resiliency model.
And the conference is the Resiliency Summit?
Oh, yes, that's the Resilience Symposium is what we called it.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think, Heather, we're able to grab the emails from folks who are here. Maybe we can send out an email to everyone who's in the room, if possible. Heather, I don't know if you can give me a thumbs up I don't want to just put us on the spot and that's not true.
Hey, Nicole, yep, I can get all of the chat information and get that sent out. Actually, once the presentation is over, I'm going to have the recorded sent out to everybody that was registered. And I think we had almost 60 people that was registered. So I'm going to send that along with all of the chat information. That way, any kind of links that were added, we can get those put in as well.
Nice.
Thank you so much for that, Heather. Appreciate you.
Cara, Jen, any other last words?
Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.
Yep. Y'all have a great day.